question you were asking?
I was talking about the time limit.
The time limit?
Yeah.
You know, it's funny because you guys have these 5 to 7 minute time limits in your speeches, and you know, depending on what speech you're going to give in your life, you're going to have a different type of time limit. But it's really, really important because especially if you are a client of someone's and they hire you to do a speech presentation, if you go way over your time limit or way under, you kind of throw off their whole schedule. They might have a whole thing planned, and you have to be respectful of that. There are some people that have shown up so late for their speeches, and it just kind of kills your career. If that's what you're trying to do as a speaker. So we just want you guys to organize your ideas within a time limit so that you kind of get that habit down for the future. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So a lot of the questions I addressed in here, one of them is how to eliminate ums and likes. I have a lot of students ask me that. I've seen some fantastic speeches where people have really great ideas, but they just say like a lot and it kills it. You know, it doesn't seem quite as professional. And honestly, the biggest thing is listen to books on tape. That's what worked for me. So that's what I wrote down here in the book. You start to kind of mimic the way that person talks, and it's good to practice your English, to practice proper speaking. So I highly recommend that. Another one is what do I do with my hands while I present? There's a video you can watch. I wrote it down here. It's Make Body Language Your Superpower by Stanford School of Business. We watched that one. And there's another one called What Do I Do with My Hands? And those are actually listed here in the book. And the second one that I mentioned here, he says sit down in a chair and give your speech in a seated position. Because naturally when you are speaking to people, you use gestures. So record yourself speaking in the seated position and then see what you did and how you moved your hands naturally, and then mimic that when you stand up. So that's a good option. Do any of you guys have a hard time making the proper hand gestures? I feel like you guys are all pretty natural about it. So if you ever have a hard time with it, consider sitting down or watching some of your recorded speeches. And if it looks like you're doing just fine, then don't worry about it. Sometimes I watch how other professional speakers present their speeches, and I'll see how they do gestures. And if I think my gestures are in line with that, I don't worry about it. So that's a good way to kind of check how you're doing with your progress. Another question I get from people is, I'm afraid I might start pacing or fidgeting during my speech. If you know that you can move to one point of the room, move back, and keep it pretty minimal, then by all means go for it. Like I've said before, some people fall into the trap where they get a little comfortable and they go, okay, I can keep moving. And then they just keep moving and they never stop. So you have to be really careful about it. I say you can stay planted. Depending on who you talk to, the teacher's going to have a different piece of advice. Some people say you can use the triangle method, where you just move to different points in the room. I say stay planted, use some hand gestures. If you feel the need to walk to a different point in the room or move closer to your audience, then do it. But especially for beginner speakers, I think it's okay to just stand confidently and be comfortable with your movements. Another question is, how can I feel more comfortable establishing eye contact? You guys remember the trick I told you? How to feel more comfortable? There was one big one that I always stick with.
Was it the one you should make friends and look at them?
I always say, you guys have groups in this class. Tell your group members, you sit there, you sit there, you sit there. I need to be sure I'm looking throughout the room. And having you guys planted here will make me more comfortable. Please smile at me, make me feel like I'm doing a good job, and then you have friendly faces to look at, and it's not so intimidating to look around then. Any other suggestions for eye contact? Personally, I think that's one of the better ones. Did you have another one? Yeah, people say that. Honestly, some professional speakers say, yeah, that works. You can look at the top of their heads, look at the top of their ear, top of their hat, whatever it is. But some speakers say that, especially in a small crowd, that doesn't work because the small audience is going to notice. Can you tell right now that I'm looking at the top of your head instead of your eyes? Is it a little weird? Yeah. So especially in a small crowd, maybe in a huge auditorium you can pull that off, but maybe not in a small setting. So what if I'm not loud enough? Now, I've had some students come up to me and they say, I don't think I'm going to be loud enough. And they are kind of soft-spoken, and I say, why don't you come practice for me? And then they get up in front of me and maybe another student who they wanted in the class to watch them, and they are fantastic. Their vocals are great. It was just a fear. There was no need to fear they were loud enough. Now, I do have other students who are afraid of that, and yes, they are soft-spoken. What I tell them is, speak obnoxiously loud. To you, it's going to be obnoxiously loud. To us, it's going to be just about the perfect volume. So that's my biggest piece of advice. Go home, try to speak as loud as possible, record yourself, ask other people's opinions. Is this loud enough? Do you think this is loud enough for a classroom of 30 people? And then see what they say. Another question. I can never stay within a given time limit, and we talked about this a second ago. Is it really required though? Yes. The reason we have you practice staying within time limits right now at the beginner speech stage is so that later on in life, when you are slotted for a specific amount of time at a certain event, you don't go over your time, because that ruins the program. That ruins the whole schedule they had planned. And you also don't go under the time, because then people think, well, what went wrong? Why didn't they meet the time? So make sure that you always keep that in mind. Why can't public speaking be just like a conversation with my friends? I actually had an online student ask me this. They said, why is it so scary? Why can't it just be the same? Well, it's because we are biologically trained to believe that if a group of people is staring directly at us, they might be wanting to attack us. It's a predator-prey type of feeling. It's just part of biology. But it's something that once you do it enough, you get used to being in that type of situation. It's not so scary anymore. There's a few videos here, why we fear public speaking and how to overcome it. That was a Forbes website. You guys have that in the book. And then there's also another one called Taming the Mammoth, why we should stop caring what other people think. And it's called waitbutwhy.com. That's a pretty popular website. And it's a pretty funny but also really enlightening article. So it all goes back to biology. Another question, how can I connect with my audience more? And this I thought was really interesting. Another online student asked me this. She said, I talk to customers so much that I feel like I've just become too direct, impolite, or detached. You guys know anyone like that? They might work in retail or something, and they've been doing it for so long that they just don't really care about being polite anymore. They're just kind of over it. No? Nobody? Well, I mean, I've known some people like that. And the thing is, keep in mind how you would like to be treated. You know, you don't want to be impolite to them. You don't know what their situation is. I've heard a lot of stories of someone who's sick of their job, they have a customer they're getting annoyed with. Customer might not be doing anything wrong, they might just, you know, have an annoying question. And the employee is a little bit rude, and then later on they run into that person in a different situation where the tables are turned. And you know, you don't want to have set up a bad situation with somebody else. So treat everybody like you would want to be treated, and that goes back to audience analysis too. Keep your audience in mind when you're preparing your speeches. As the audience member, you don't want to be uncomfortable. You don't want to feel like they weren't happy to be up there. You treat everyone like you want to be treated in your speeches, in your work situations. So that's a great way to just connect with people, is be kind and treat them like you want to be treated. Is it okay to memorize my speech word for word? This is a tricky one. It depends on what school you're at, probably. I know in Central Florida, extemporaneous speeches are exactly what you're supposed to do. I know when you get out of college and you might be on the speaking circuit, maybe you become a big-time keynote speaker and you get paid a lot of money, those most of the time are memorized word for word. It's more of a performance than a presentation. And those people practice their speeches hundreds and hundreds of times, especially before their first time, their first big paying job. So it depends on what situation you're in. Keep that in mind. Of course, if you're doing a play, yes, memorize it word for word. Your drama coach or director probably wouldn't be very happy if you were ad-libbing all the time. So it depends on the situation. In this class, yes, extemporaneous delivery. You want to be conversational with the audience. You don't want to be, looking for that one specific word that you just can't remember in the middle of your speech. You want to be sure you can kind of add different things here and there if need be. How can I avoid rambling? Do you guys remember the most important or the most memorable parts of your speech? Do you guys remember what those are? I mentioned it last class.
Introduction and conclusion.
Yes, introduction and conclusion. So that will give you a hint as to how you can avoid rambling. Most people ramble in the beginning or in the end because they didn't know how to start or they didn't know how to finish the speech. So if you have a good solid opening and a good solid closing, that'll help you avoid rambling. I've had some students in the past and they just say, I ramble at the beginning, I can't seem to just dive right in and just ask the question or just use my startling statistic. I can't seem to just do it. I can't get to the point. And I say, write it down, just write it down. Commit that to memory, commit that first part. And then when you feel yourself about to ramble, look down. What is that part that you have to say? And do that. A lot of people have the same problem with the conclusion. I say, when you feel like you're gonna start rambling for the next minute, when really you should be closing in the last 15 seconds, read what's on that card. It's probably just a one-line statement, and it's like a get-out-of-jail-free card. Read it, say thank you, you're done, and the audience will thank you and clap. And it'll be much more concise and much more powerful than if you had just kind of kept going for no apparent reason. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes when you're up there and then you forget something, and you're trying to read back at it, because of the fear of the people, you can't even see what you're reading.
Yes, it's true, it's true. That's why they say it's a bad idea to bring up your outline, because the font is too small. There's no way. They say what's either going to happen is you're going to end up reading it directly, or you're going to end up winging it completely, because you can't keep going back and forth, because it's not reliable enough when you're up here. That's why when you are presenting or practicing your speeches, write down your own note cards. You can write them as big as you want and see how it works with the balance of the note cards, the eye contact, and speaking to your practice audience. Make sure you write it in a way that you can read while you're up in front of the audience. So that's a good thing to bring up. Another thing, I feel like I could talk all day long and never get to my point. Do you guys know how to solve this one? How can I be clear and get directly to my point? Be prepared. What's one of the first things you do when you prepare a speech? You think about your audience. What's one of the other things you consider? No, it's before research. What's the purpose of your speech? What's the point of your speech? If you're having a hard time getting your point across, well, what is your point? Most of the time, if you can't get your point across, it's because you never decided what your point was. And that's a real thing. So you have to know what the point of your speech is first. Are you informing us to do something? Are you persuading us to do something? Are you showing us how to do something? Are you telling us about yourself? What is the point of your speech? And as long as you get that clear early on, you won't have a hard time getting your point across. But another good way to make sure that you're being very clear throughout your speech is to make sure it's organized. But number one, make sure you've got that purpose. That'll help you to not speak in circles. Another thing, I'm so nervous in front of big crowds. What do I do? This is a little similar to the biology question, but look at step 2 in this book, different methods for increasing your confidence. And just practice in front of small crowds and continually practice till you get to bigger and bigger crowds. It's a matter of making this a habit. If it's not a habit, it starts to become a little scarier. So just continually do it. Put yourself in speaking situations. How can I get from one main point to the next in a way that makes sense and doesn't sound choppy? I'm sure you guys know the answer to this. Get from one point to the next.
Write it down.
Transitions, what did you say?
Write it down. Write it down.
Yeah, you can write down your transition, yeah. So transitions, signposts, a little bit of repetition. Those road maps during your speech really help the speaker. And yeah, sometimes they sound a little bit obvious, but it's a natural progression from one point to the next. It makes things a lot easier on you and the speaker. How can I get over this once and for all? Do you know anyone who feels that way? I'm so sick of this. I'm so sick of dreading every presentation, every speech. Do you know anyone? No? Maybe? So my question here, or the student's question was, I feel like I'm asked to give a speech once every few years, just frequently enough that it terrifies me, but not frequently enough that I get used to it. I've told you guys about Toastmasters, right? So that's a really great option. I have some friends who are starting their own businesses and they need clients, so they've joined Toastmasters because they want to learn how to speak to people and speak in a professional manner in a way that's effective. I also know speech instructors who join Toastmasters to keep their skills polished. It's a great organization. I don't think you have to have any requirements to be part of it, but you will be giving speeches on a regular basis. The setup is a lot like this, except a lot more speeches. So later on in life, as you find you need to polish your skills, look into Toastmasters organizations. And for more information, I did include a link to a blog post that was really great. It was called Speaking About Presenting, and the article was called How to Get the Most Out of Toastmasters. The website was speakingaboupresenting.com. So that's a great option if you guys feel like you really want to get into it a little bit more, especially after this semester. So those are the FAQs for this section. We'll go over tips for using technology a little bit later.